chats. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and also just for your interest in our work broadly. I love these informal sessions because, unlike our webinars, these sessions are much more interactive. We can actually answer any questions you might have. And they really allow us to peel back the curtain a little bit for a more behind the scenes look at our projects, at our work, at our people, at our organization, and of our field. So tonight we're going to start by picking the brains of our expert panelists, who I will introduce in just a sec. And then we will open it up for a substantial amount of time, hopefully, for questions and discussion. So think about what questions you might have. You're welcome to put them in the chat throughout the conversation, just so you don't forget, or just write them down and ask them later. But these fireside chats are really meant to be informal. So please feel comfortable asking questions. No question is dumb. No question is too small. And if you'd like to share your own expertise and thoughts once we open it up, we'd also love to learn from you too. We always learn from people's experiences and questions and perspectives. We are recording this. You probably got a notice that that we are recording it. That's really just to share with people who also have registered but are unable to join us tonight. So we'll be sending that out to all of you, as well as anyone else who registered. Please keep yourself on mute unless you end up asking a question and talking later. And if you feel like it, in the chat box, if you could just put in, if you're so inclined, put in your name, maybe where you're calling in from. We'd love to see where people are joining from, and also what brought you here tonight. What did you want to learn, or why'd you come? So just before we get started and we talk to these wonderful people I have here tonight to learn from, I wanted to just provide a little bit of context on the topic tonight. I was thinking about it today, that one of the most amazing things about my job, and I think probably everyone at ISPU, whether staff, board, or otherwise, would say is that one of the most amazing things about our job is seeing our research in action. I think a lot of people know about us as a research organization, but what I just thrive on, and I think everybody else does, is seeing that research put into action and really fundamentally making positive change. But it's also one of the most challenging things about our jobs, is to explain that or illustrate it. How does ISP research actually change the world? And sometimes that can feel a little bit nebulous. So tonight we actually want to talk about that. What does that look like? I think all of you know ISPU's mission is to conduct research and education on topics impacting Muslims in America, so that everyone can have better informed conversations and make better informed decisions. I always like to say, in short, that we put rigorous solution-seeking research into the right hands at the right time in the right ways, so that people can actually use it. And we do all of this because we are working, as many people are in our field, towards an America where Muslims, just like every other American, are thriving and equal. And, our tagline, I think, says it all: research making an impact. And that is really what we try to do every day. So tonight we're going to talk about how we actually do that. What does that look like? How do we translate research into action? And more than action, how do we translate it into change? So we're joined by two of ISPU's incredibly smart, thoughtful, just dedicated staff, each of whom spends their days and their considerable talents putting this rigorous research into the right hands. So the two people we're joined by are Erum Ikramullah, ISPU's Senior Research Project Manager, who's been with us, I think. Erum, are you on your 6th year now? I've lost track.
I am. Yep.
Yeah, she's been here almost as long as me, just a couple of years shy. And Asad Dandia, who's one of the newest members of our team, and he is ISPU's Outreach and Partnerships Manager, and we're really excited to welcome him to the team earlier this year. So I want to get right to it. And again, for all of you joining, think about what questions you might have. We'll have a little back and forth with the panelists, and then we want to hear from you. So I'm going to start, I think, with both of you, actually. So either one of you can answer this question first, and then I'll put it to the other one. But this is all about impact. This fireside chat is really about impact. So I want to center that in the discussion and actually start there. So perhaps you could each share just one example of a time when you saw or experienced ISPU's research actually making a real world impact. And maybe Erum, I'll start with you. You've got seniority.
Thank you. And that's a really great question, Meira. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation tonight. So with your question, what comes to my mind is a research project that we conducted in partnership with the Muslim Wellness Foundation specifically on interfaith dynamics in Black and African American communities, and specifically focused on the views of Black Christians, of Muslims and Islam. And while we haven't, we don't have like a report out on that, we have done some initial presentations of that research, and I'm very grateful to say that I had the opportunity to be at those presentations, and what I witnessed was truly amazing. And it almost kind of displays, they're examples of our impact on a very individual and unique level. So at these presentations, what I saw was just a lot of people and audience members feeling seen and represented for the first time through this research. And it sounds weird to sort of feel seen through research, but I think because there's no other research that exists on this topic. And so it just truly resonated with audience members. It landed like we just captured people's actual lived experiences, and it was just like this moment of like, yes, that's it, an acknowledgement. And so I'm really excited, and I think it indicates the potential of this research to have really broad implications and impact on wider conversations on interfaith dynamics. And I'm really excited, and I hope to be able to share more with our audience members about a partnership we're embarking on with the Muslim Wellness Foundation as we continue to take the next step of getting the word out about this research and actually train faith and community leaders on the findings of this research. So I think what we've done initially just shows how much it resonated and landed with people, and it speaks to the broader impact that this will have as we go around training faith and community leaders.
Great. I'm also really excited about this project, which we started about 3 years ago, I think now. And there's such potential there to bridge interfaith gaps within African American communities and beyond. So it's really exciting. Asad, what's one thing that comes to mind for you where you've seen in your few months with ISPU where ISPU's research has made an impact?
First of all, I just want to thank you, Meira, for hosting this conversation. It's an honor to be part of your last fireside chat, and to thank you all for joining this conversation with us. I'm loving the introductions. You're all dropping in the chat. Please do continue to introduce yourselves. I'm the outreach person, so I'll be maybe the first contact you'll have at the organization. So I'd love to get to know you in the coming weeks and months as we look for ways to collaborate with each other. I just joined ISPU in August. So the example I want to cite in terms of research making an impact is an example that predates me joining the organization. I've been familiar with ISPU's work for years. And the first time I found myself citing it in a previous job was when I worked for the New York chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE New York, where I was also in a similar outreach role. And one of the jobs I had was to conduct a survey of Muslims in the New York City area to basically do a temperature check on Islamophobia in the city 22 years after 9/11. And, to start that survey, we needed to have some sort of grounding in what the demographics are of Muslims in New York. We had a kind of a vague idea that there are anywhere between 700,000 to 1 million, depending on your estimates. We knew it was one of the most diverse Muslim communities in the country, but we didn't really have a good idea of the texture of the community. And so what was the first thing I did is I looked up the ISPU's reporting on the subject. And we pulled out a 2018 impact report that ISPU had published about Muslims in New York City. And it had everything from, what industries Muslims are actively involved in, what are their, what's the Muslim presence in city hall and city government, what are Muslims doing every day in the city. And it kind of gave us a blueprint to use for our own survey and our own research at CARE New York. And, alhamdulillah, we were able to survey somewhere close to 500 Muslims in the New York City area. And we published a report called Feeling the Hate, which we then presented in front of City Hall. And we directly cited the ISPU. And I don't think that we would have been able to publish such a report without having ISPUs as a resource to back us up. And to this day, it's the report that gets cited by nonprofits, city agencies, and so on and so forth when they want to talk about Islamophobia or do a temperature check of Islamophobia in New York City. So it was really, really great. And then after that report was published, I finished my time at CARE. The grant was up. I saw a job opening at ISPU, and here I am.
We're glad you made your way to us, Asad, after all these years of using our work. And I think you bring up kind of an interesting point, actually, about the ecosystem. That's one thing I always try to explain to people, and sometimes it's hard to make that connect. But, there's a very large ecosystem of thousands of organizations, right? I don't know the exact number, but who are working both within the Muslim community and sort of in allied organizations that are, aligned with our mission and trying to make it a equitable place, trying to make America an equitable place for everybody. So the question is really around where is the research, what's the place for research in that ecosystem? So maybe, Erum, I can ask you that question. If you could talk a little bit about where ISPU does in fact fit into that ecosystem, and how do we make sure that we are servicing that ecosystem in the best way possible?
Yeah, thank you. I feel like we're right in the middle. That's kind of how I see it. Is we're kind of right in the middle of that ecosystem. You have this network of organizations that you're describing, comprises various sectors, from like advocacy organizations to mosques and community centers, faith organizations to health and wellness, whether they're clinics. So there's all these, this network, this whole, like you said, ecosystem of various organizations serving different specific sectors. And our job, because our focus broadly is on informing conversations and well-informed dialogue and decision-making with rigorous research, is that wherever these conversations are being had about and for American Muslims, we want our research to be included in that. So we're there trying to make sure that our research is in the hands of these organizations. And so the way I think about it is sort of after the research, during and before. So for example, after the research, it's really important for us to make sure that the research lands and it's not just in reports on our website, but that people are aware of it, which is why we have, for example, Asad and our colleague Petra dedicated to outreach, to making sure that this research gets into the right hands. And that the research is being passed on, right? We're passing on the baton through this research to our partners who are doing the work on the ground, and so that their work can be informed not just by stories, because they're busy themselves. Not every organization can have a research wing, right? And they can't base everything based on stories and anecdotes. So we're here to provide the rigorous research that can inform and the evidence that can inform their work. But even sort of taking a step back and deciding how we come up with the topics that we want to study. It's not just about what's interesting, but it's actually about what's needed. So we want to make sure that we are in the right spaces. We at ISPU are in these spaces where these conversations are being had, where our partners are, where end users for a project might be in order to really listen, identify gaps and research needs. So that goes from like being at conferences and gatherings of Muslim leaders and more, you know, wherever these conversations are being had, we have to be there to understand what the needs are of the community and where there are gaps in research. And then during the actual research process, we don't do our research in a vacuum. We make sure that as we have projects and we think about who might be the end users, that we actually involve them, you know, for example, on our board of advisors for specific projects, that we include end users there so that they are informing the project as we go along. And it's not, you know, so they're there kind of every step of the way. We're always thinking about the end user and about how this research will be used, what are the needs, who will use it, and how.
Yeah, one thing just to add to that are our toolkits. I think that's been such an important way in which we kind of serve certain sectors. So we have 20 years of research on our website, which is a lot. And a lot of people come to us, like journalists, for example, and they're doing a very specific topic or like they're focused on something. And they don't have time to wade through 20 years of research to find like the few things that might be relevant for them. So I love the way you and the team have taken that research and really with the end user in mind said, okay, what if I was a journalist, what would I care about? Right? Like what would help me do my job better? If I was a policymaker, what would help me do my job better? And those toolkits are really geared towards those people, and just saves them a lot of time and heartache trying to find that stuff. Asad, you know, you just joined us from an advocacy organization, right? The Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, is one of our country's, you know, premier sort of civil rights organizations for Muslim communities. And they really tackle some frontline issues around hate crimes and bigotry and countering discrimination and things like that. So I'm wondering how you've made the switch, right? Coming from that kind of organization to a research organization. And what are you noticing in terms of our work and how it melds with the work of places like CARE or other organizations?
I love this question because this was a question that I had to think about even when I was giving my job interview for this role. How do I make the switch from advocacy and activism, 10 years worth of advocacy and activism, to a research organization, especially given the fact that I have a very big mouth and very strong opinions? It was a challenge. And I think, having an academic background also helped because in academia, we're called to do uh, objective research as best as we can, but also realizing that yes, while ISPU is technically a research and not an advocacy organization, it didn't feel like the shift was so major precisely because of that network and ecosystem that you're talking about. And it just in terms of like the pipeline of getting that information out, I sell myself as moving to another part of that same pipeline rather than working from an entirely new pipeline, right? So, you know, in advocacy, you're at the end of the pipeline, right? You're what's coming out of that pipeline. In research, you might be somewhere in the middle or somewhere in the beginning. So I just saw myself as like shifting spots, right? Where now I'm going to be presenting this research to the advocates. I'm going to be handing it over to them rather than being the advocate myself. And there's a shift in terms of presentation. There's a shift in terms of how you frame the issue, right? But I think that the broader goal of getting research out to the public was still there. It's just I was in a different part of that wider pipeline. So it wasn't as crazy as I had thought it would be. And I'm actually coming to appreciate being in the role of, a research person where now I get to work with Muslims across the social, political, theological spectrum to provide them with the resources they need so that our communities can flourish together. So it's been a real thrill to do what I get to do.
And for those of you who don't know, Asad when he still does this, but he gives tours, or was giving tours at the Museum of the City of New York. I'm sure his tours are amazing. So if any of you are in New York City, you might want to check that out. And he's also starting to give tours of New York City, sort of an introduction to Muslims in New York City. So just you get to go to some really cool parts of the city that you might not be able to check out otherwise. So just something to think about if you are visiting NYC.
I appreciate the promotion. Yeah, so outside of the
Yeah.
ISPU, I'm somewhat of a local historian, and I'm working on a project to take folks around tours of various New York City neighborhoods with a special focus on immigrants and religious minorities, neighborhoods where there've been a long Muslim presence that people just don't know about, places like Harlem, Lower Manhattan, so on and so forth. And a lot of what I'm going to be presenting on these tours is going to combine some of the research that's being produced at my day job, which is great. So there's always a way to kind of weave in the work to different aspects of activism, and when you think of it that way, it doesn't feel like I've left my role. It just feels like I've shifted to a different lever, with the same ultimate goal of having our communities flourish and thrive.
Great. And just a reminder to those of you listening, I'm maybe going to pose two more questions to our panelists, and then I want to open it up to you all. So I have to pick wisely because we had a bunch of questions we were going to ask. Let's see. Maybe yeah, I like to open it up for questions, tutors. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and ask, we have a number of projects coming to fruition over the next 6 months or so. So, Erum, especially because you're leading a lot of these projects, maybe you could share just one project that you're really excited about, and what do you think the impact of that project might be? Or what are you
And
excited about?
yeah, it's definitely hard to choose. It's always exciting just to see projects come to an end, just given the length of the research process. But in particular, I'm really excited about the release of our study on the relationship between popular media portrayals and depictions of Muslims, and that really and the relationship to that with opinions about anti-Muslim and anti-democratic policies. It's a really unique project because we've seen like separate research just focusing on characterizing how Muslims are portrayed in popular media, and then you see separate studies sort of analyzing policy. So this is a really unique way to sort of link popular culture and policy. And so I'm really excited for the potential to inform, pop culture change makers like screenwriters at the organizations and Hollywood executives, and to be able to show them that they're, depending on the results, like if there is a link with how these characters are developed and portrayed, and that might have the potential impact that may have on audience members' views towards certain policies. So there's a really potential for like really powerful findings to use to inform these change makers.
I'm also, I mean, we have so many projects. I could wax lyrical about every single one, but this one is really, I think, vital, because one of the things you potentially hear when you share research that depictions of Muslims in popular media are largely either absent or negative, right? Like that's the way they are. Um, one of the things, or one of the comebacks that's a potential by the creative folks is, well, everybody understands it's just entertainment. They don't take this stuff seriously. It's like a bang up movie. Like no one takes these things seriously. Um, but in all likelihood, the audience does take these things internally. And what we're trying to look at is whether that actually leads to support for policies that are really harmful, not just for Muslim communities and those confused with Muslim communities, but for our democracy and our institutions. So that's really exciting. Just to give you all an example of like why this matters, we actually had a filmmaker come to us yesterday or the day before, and they are really interested. They're writing a pilot for television, and they were really interested in incorporating a Native American Muslim character. I'm not really sure why they wanted a character like that, but but they were really focused on having a Native American Muslim character. And we have research on that. And so we were able to not only point the filmmaker in the direction of, some actual real life people that they could base their character off of, but we have research on the sort of experiences within Native communities of Muslims and other Native Americans who are not Muslim, and how sort of the interfaith dynamics work. And so that's great. We may at some point see a character based on our research on a popular sitcom or, a popular drama TV show. So, Asad, I want to ask you before we leave it to our audience for questions. You're charged with sort of passing the baton, right? So to speak. Erum mentioned that before, that we do research and then we use that research to educate the public and equip leaders and change makers. So you are effectively charged with putting this research into the right hands. Can you talk a little bit about how exactly you do that? Like, what form does that take? What does that look like?
Yeah, I feel like one of the great things about this role is that actually bringing the research to the world does not necessarily have to take a single form, right? So to give you some concrete examples, we just put out our names portraits, names meaning Native American Indigenous Muslim Stories report, which tells the stories of Native American Muslims, on Turtle Island. And uh, we have portraits that we're going to be inviting museums to display and community centers to display. And that's one way of presenting the research. And we're already getting a whole lot of requests from local organizations, universities, community centers. The Muhammad Ali Community Center reached out to us in Kentucky. They want to exhibit our portraits. Another way could be Islamophobia trainings. Yesterday, I gave a training to Pen America, a nationwide training to Pen America, where 100 staff members showed up. And I spoke to them about media literacy and, gave them some myth-busting facts about American Muslims. Other ways that we can present the research is, events and panels with documentary filmmakers. Last weekend, I was at NYU at a panel where we watched a documentary called "The Town Called Victoria," which, by the way, is on PBS. It's free. I definitely encourage you to watch it. It's a documentary about a mosque in Victoria that was firebombed. And a member of that congregation came to NYU along with the filmmaker and many other community members to speak about how the community responded to the arson of their mosque. And ISPU was there to present our data on mosque opposition. We found 42 cases in this country of mosque opposition, and I had the opportunity to present that data, right? So audience members got a personal story, a portrait of a community that was affected, but also the data to kind of function as a scaffolding for that story. So there are different ways that you can present our research and data to the public. It's we publish reports, but the way that those reports are presented to different audiences can vary greatly. And that's what I really love about the role, is that it's constantly evolving and constantly being tailored to the needs of the people that we're sharing it with.
Um, Fantastic. So I do have a bunch more questions, but I do want to open it up to our panelists, to our attendees and people who are joining us. So I think I'm going to do that first, and then if there's silence, then I will jump in. But I think there's a few questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to try my best to get to all of the questions. Thank you all so much for being so chatty in the chat. I love it. And, so first question, Faizan. Hi, good evening. It's great to see you here. Do you have tips on how you map or triage who difficult data can influence? So, how do you pick audiences who may need awareness? And how do you gauge their openness to topics that may be challenging for them, or they may not want to hear about, or they may not even accept the data, right? Like they may just say that it's fake news or something like that. What tips do you have for people trying to do this?
Erum, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take that one?
I'll let you take that, and I can jump in with anything else.
Yeah. So, you know, oftentimes up until now, I haven't found any challenges in terms of presenting the data, but I think it helps to have buy-in with community members before bringing the data to them. I found this in my experience as an organizer that, community members and congregations will be much more amenable to, receiving information or facts or stories that you present to them if there is something of a working relationship that you already have with them. So there's a data stage that a lot of us have to do, a lot of us have to go through, and that's part of the outreach strategy that we're developing here at ISPU. Is that we're proactively developing relationships with various mosques and community centers before we bring the data to them, right? So rather than just bringing it to them cold and saying, "Here's the data," you know, you have to incorporate it, which kind of it almost comes off as kind of rude, right? You develop a real relationship with them before you present them with that data, right? And I would apply this not just to research, but to any kind of front-facing organizational work that you're doing. And this comes from my experience as an organizer, right? I grew up in a community, in a low-income working class community that's quite insular, that doesn't really have a high level of trust for outsiders. um, but when I speak to that community, when I bring information and resources to that community, they're able to trust it because it's coming from me, given the relationship that I've had with them. So I would say before even bringing research and data to anyone, just work on building a relationship, right? Grab coffee with them, develop friendships, where feasible, and then when it comes time to bring that data, they will be much more receptive to it because they have that kind of bond with you. I hope that helps. I think Meira wants to answer the question as well.
I did, and then I lost it. I totally had a senior moment. Erum, if you have something to add, go
No,
ahead.
I think Asad really summed it up nicely, and that's sort of what came to my mind. I think it's a relationships, 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 and just yeah, I think that's really key. And sort of coming together and coming from a place of understanding, because there are so many challenges we're all facing. There's so many contentious topics. And so I think the key is building relationships and coming from a place of sort of understanding and sincerity in those relationships.
I remembered what I was going to say. What I was going to add to those smart comments was, I think we at ISPU have just over the years developed an understanding that there is a large and different sized movable middle on any given topic, right? So we don't waste our time, quite frankly, or spend a lot of sleepless nights worrying about bringing research to people who just don't want to hear it, right? Like there are always going to be people on any given topic who are on the really extreme margins on any side of that topic. And that's not really what we're here for. I think where we see research having the most impact is on a couple of different audiences that are in that movable middle, right? That middle ground that like they're curious, they're interested. They may not be totally supportive, but like they're also not like way off on the fringe negative. Um, and they've got an open mind. They wanna learn. They're there to learn and listen. So I would say focus on those people. Don't worry too much about the other people who are on the extremes. If they want to come to you and use your stuff, then great. And if not, there's plenty of other fish in the sea who will actually care. So that would be my advice as well. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. There's a question about reaching Gen Z. I think people think of these reports as like policy reports or as like very old school, like young people who've been watching 30-second videos are not going to be super excited about a 30-page report with data and graphs. So, can you guys talk a little bit about how we reach young people?
Yeah, so I love that question because I've recently begun to experiment with TikTok for my tours. And I'm really impressed at the fact that, you know, that there's an opportunity here to reach these young folks. Most of the young folks that I'm connected with are through youth groups. And usually when I'm speaking or presenting to a youth group, I'm not bringing like a report to them and saying, here's the facts and figures. It's more connecting to these young Muslims on an interpersonal level. And so connecting to them in spaces where I know they're already going to be at has been one way for us to connect to young people, right? So that's youth groups. I'm going to be giving 2 talks at the Mass ICNA convention this later this month in Chicago, one of which is going to be about bullying against Muslim youth, and the other one is going to be about the state of Muslim youth. So both of these are going to be on the subject of youth, and particularly young people, Gen Z and younger. And all of it is based on, pre-existing ISPU research, but also just interpersonal engagement with young people that I've already had in these settings. So I am going to, now that you put the bug in my head, I'm gonna pressure the organization to create a TikTok page, and maybe I can do some facts and figures while walking the streets of New York to talk about the American Muslim community and our diversity. So thank you for that recommendation.
Yeah, I think we actually started a TikTok about a year ago, but we've been pretty lax about using it. So maybe Asad, you can you can
Yeah.
get us to use it more.
It felt awkward when we had to
It
record.
felt awkward.
felt
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No,
You
I
can
think you can. I think you can do it, Asad.
you can pull it
I,
off.
Yeah.
I look forward to sharing data about, American Muslims and mosque attendance while crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. Um, it's been a dream of mine to do that.
We also
We
have our Gen Z advisory board, which I think is also really useful. We've met with them, on the research side to get their input on topics. So I think they meet with like all our different departments, and that's particularly useful for communications, who's out there getting the word out. So it was a really good question. It's something we're still figuring out how to do well, but it sounds like we have a lot of new energy and input into that, as well as this consultation from this advisory board who can point us in the right direction. I think they did like some Instagram takeovers for us at convention, so helping us get up to speed on our social media as well.
Yeah, they did. They've been great. And we have done some Instagram lives and things like that, but not in a huge way. So I'm trying to get to all the questions. I will say that if we don't get to a question that you would like an answer for, Erum, if you could do me a favor and put all 3 of our emails in the chat box. That way, if we don't get to a question that you have a way to get in touch with us, because you all are asking some really good questions in the Q&A and also in the chat box. I also just want to say that I recognize so many names and people here, and I'm really grateful that you joined us. So I can't mention everyone by name, but for all of you who know me, it's just really nice to see you here. One question in the chat was about research being used in policy making decision by lawmakers. I might just take a quick stab at that, and then Asad and Petra, if you have anything to add. But the resounding answer is yes, 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 yes. We have been engaging a lot with policymakers over the years, and most especially in the late Obama years, where a member of our team met with Obama along with a number of other Muslim leaders, meeting with the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, the Department of Education. I mean, just across the departments, we have been sharing our research pretty far and wide, especially in the past year and a half. I'm trying to give you maybe one example of that is we did we've been working a lot on trying to combat Islamophobia. So that research, we have a large body of research on combating Islamophobia, and that has been shared very widely. The Department of Education, we did a bullying webinar, an anti-bullying webinar with them recently for teachers. There's so much I could share about that. But one really quick example is we did some research on banking while Muslim, and we found that Muslims are really unlike other American faith groups, are really experiencing some major challenges when it comes to accessing banking services. A lot of Muslim nonprofits and businesses especially get their accounts closed for literally no reason. They're not warned. It's just they get a letter in the mail and it's like, we're closing your account. And there's no recourse. There's no way to deal with it. And this is really a huge problem. I mean, Muslim businesses and nonprofits are 3 to 4 times more likely to have these kinds of issues with credit cards, with banking. And it really stunts community development and economic growth in America, right? Because a lot of Muslims are business owners, and if they're not able to function, it not only harms Muslim communities, and individuals, but it harms our country. And for nonprofits serving Muslim communities, doing social services and things like that, to just have your accounts closed for no reason is really deeply problematic. So we've been able to meet, because we finally have data on that and not just anecdotes, we've been able to take that to like the National Economic Commission, right, the NEC. We've been able to take that to places like the UN. I mean, really high level decision makers who have the power to make change and to influence change. Now, whether we'll see a huge change straight away. Because of that, things move very slowly at the policy level. But I think that data really opened the door to even having those conversations at the highest levels. I don't know, Erum and Asad, if you want to add anything, but that was just one example that came to mind. Okay, let's see. This is a question I'm going to pose. It's very specific to researchers, but I think I want to open it up because we actually have a project looking at this. So someone writes in that they study barriers to professional addiction services in Muslim American communities. And the research that this person has done so far indicates that the entire community is, quote, pre-contemplative. Any suggestions for launching initiatives to educate regarding the impact of drugs and alcohol in Muslim American communities? So Erum, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, we're really excited to hear about your research, and I'd love to connect with you further. We're actually in the middle, or not middle, the beginning stages of a study, actually just entering the field on a study looking at collecting getting connected to families who have actually gone through substance abuse treatment, and sort of documenting those stories and the unique challenges that may face Muslim families and Muslim patients in these settings. And then in particular, we'll also be doing case studies highlighting clinics that are focused on treating Muslim patients, and documenting stories of success that can then be replicated, hopefully can share lessons learned and successes that could hopefully be replicated across other communities. So we definitely see this, as a topic, definitely in need of more research and study. And so I'm really excited to hear that there's, other research being done. So I'd love to connect with you further about that.
There are so many good questions. I'm just trying to figure out who to answer. Yeah, and I haven't even read through all of them. One quick question, there's a number of questions about like Muslim think tanks or research. How do we describe ourselves? We initially called ourselves a think tank. We now say we're a research and education organization, which is essentially a think tank. So, whether you describe us as a think tank or a research and education organization, one half dozen or the other, we do the same thing. I think the difference is that I would call us a think and do tank. We don't just exist to think, we exist to think and then do, which is exactly what we're talking about tonight, right? Educating the public, equipping change makers, that's the do part. So I guess that's how I would describe ourselves. And unfortunately, we are the only ones. If you know of any other think tanks that serve communities, like I haven't even found like a Jewish think tank like ours, or there was a think tank or there is a think tank that serves African American communities more on the policy level, like really focused on policy stuff, called the Joint Commission. I think they're called the Joint Commission, that I've been following for a long time. But I've been looking for 10 years for other community-based think and do tanks like ours. And there are very few. So we've had a lot of people coming to us from countries around the world, Switzerland, France, the UK, Belgium, like all over, saying, can we, Canada, we want to establish an ISPU chapter, or, for another community like this. How do you go about doing that? So we're a kind of unique model. Um, Let's see. There's a lot of people asking about the current situation in Gaza and Israel. And, ISPU is a domestic focused organization, so we actually don't do any foreign policy work. However, obviously, there are a lot of repercussions as a result of what is happening here in the United States. And that is under our purview. How do we deal with upticks in Islamophobia? And we have seen anecdotally an enormous uptick in Islamophobia. How do we deal with the right to protest and people being silenced, or getting jobs rescinded, or things like that? Like, how do we deal with that on the domestic front? Erum, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how we went about thinking about that over the past couple of months.
Yeah, so, as soon as October, we were, we were thinking, okay, how can we, again, going back to our mission, right, to inform these conversations. And the big thing was, as Meira said, staying mission focused, right? We have to stay within our scope, within our mission. So as Meira just outlined, our scope is US, but and as she's just outlined as well, there's lots of impact of what's happening in the Mideast on US Muslims and in the US. And so we already have a lot of great research to inform that. And it's actually really important to have that context, because the conversation doesn't just start now with, we have to frame all the and we're being asked to come and speak in so many places now. And while we don't have like immediate current polling data on what's going on, we have so much to ground the conversation in. Like, what are the trends in anti-Muslim discrimination and Islamophobia? How do we even measure Islamophobia? What does it look like? We have stories, we have data, and we have so much that can sort of get the conversation grounded, and then bring in some of the current data that we're seeing from other organizations, and hopefully we'll be collecting ourselves. So what we were able to do immediately was to just pull together a Google Doc, because we wanted to inform all these conversations that were taking place. So we did that work, as we spoke about, again, of like, let's do the work of what do people need. And so we went through our research, and okay, we're like, this is very relevant. This is very relevant. So we pieced together all the research that we have that can inform the conversations taking place right now, put it in a doc, and share that. And eventually we developed that into a web page, and I'll make sure to drop that link in the chat. But we developed that into a link, but we wanted to be super responsive. So we started with just a shareable Google Doc, which, got transferred. And then as the situation continues and evolves, we're now, responding to invitations to help frame these conversations and share the research we have. Hopefully conduct some original research ourselves, and updating what we're having as things evolve, as things change, making sure that we're including all the resources we have that can inform the conversations taking place.
One thing I would just add to that, I mean, I think one of the things about research making an impact is that you really have to preempt what you think might become conversations later on, because research takes a long time. So we had to think about research that could speak to any moment 3 or 4 years before that moment arose, right? So I'll give you an example. Last year, there were a lot of Supreme Court decisions, and this speaks to another question in the chat about how do we stay relevant outside the Muslim community. And I think we have enormous relevance in that. But so one example, years before all these Supreme Court decisions, I think it was last year, related to abortion and climate change and gun safety, right? There was sort of a succession of like every month there was some major decision coming down. Well, thankfully, ISPU had thought about those things at least a year before, and we had included those questions in our surveys so that when those things happened, we didn't know those things were going to happen um, exactly in the way they did, but we knew that at some point those issues were going to come up, and it would be really important that Muslim opinions were taken into account in those discussions. And so we had data at the ready when these Supreme Court decisions sort of happened. And I feel like in the current moment, thankfully, we've done a lot of research on Muslim-Jewish relationships, and actually they've been very, very strong in recent years. And so we have trend data over time about things like that. We have asked about the right to protest and people's sort of views on the constitutionality of that. So we had a lot of data that really speaks to the moment happening now. I'm gonna try and ask one more question, but before I do that, because I know people may start jumping off, an anonymous attendee, so thank you, whoever you are who posted anonymously, asked what can we do to support this work and make ISPU sustainable for decades? So thank you. This is not a fundraiser, this is a fireside chat, but since you asked, I think ISPU is really vital. Despite the fact that I am leaving in a couple of weeks, I will be ISP's biggest fan and champion for decades to come. And in fact, I just want to share that my family decided to donate $25,000 in honor of my mom, who passed away a year and a half ago, for the ISPU endowment, alongside one of our founders, Dr. Iltifat Hamzavi, whose family also donated even a larger amount to our endowment. So we really know that we need to build sustainability for the future, because research is a very difficult thing to fund. I think people have a hard time understanding how deeply impactful and foundational it is, not just for Muslim communities. We serve everybody. And actually, a lot of our work is bridging gaps, right? Bridging gaps within our country. And so I think this research is really for everybody. So we do have an end of year fundraiser happening right now. I will drop in the link in case you are so inclined to donate. But since you asked, I thought I would share that. And if you are interested in contributing to our endowment, great, email me. If you want to sign up as a sustainer and donate monthly at whatever amount, no amount is too small or big. That's also fantastic. So thanks for asking. Let's see. I'm just going to try to find one more question. Um, maybe I'll just pose this last question about what are some of the challenges to this work? Like, so Asad and Erum, this could be for either one, and maybe I'll start with you, Asad. What are some of the challenges in bringing research to, the real world?
It's a really good question. I think one of the challenges that we face as an organization is that, and this is actually a good problem to have, is that we have more than what we need for a lot of these conferences and events that I speak at. And so a challenge is in how to tailor um, our information and our material and our reports for various different audiences, and making sure to align whatever it is that we found with what these audiences want. So, between now and next week, I spoke on a university panel. I spoke to Pan America. We're having this fireside chat, but next week I'm going to be speaking to high school kids. How do I talk about Islamophobia and some of the heavy topics that we're all thinking about to high school kids or even to junior high school kids? And so the challenge for me, at least as outreach manager, is in how I can specifically tailor our material to the audiences that I'm bringing it to. And that requires a lot of careful consideration, context, practice, rehearsal. and so on and so forth. But it's a very rewarding challenge for sure at the end.
Erum, any last thoughts to add to that, to some of the challenges?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Asad said. Something that came to my mind was, yeah, tailoring everything, speaking the language of our audience. So another thing is like taking technical research. I'm always like, no, we have to word it this way and being very like particular about the research, but taking that sort of technical product and making it very accessible to the different audiences. And I think our outreach team does an amazing job of doing that. I'd say the other thing is just being able to keep churning out our research projects. But research is slow and deliberate, and there's a process. So taking time for that process, but I think especially in the examples that you presented, Meira, about those Supreme Court cases, being really responsive. And I think we've shown that we're capable of doing that when we need to, and having that foresight. Like if an issue arises where our data can speak to it, we just have to be very responsive and get it out, whether that's through a Google Doc immediately and that becomes something else. But I think being responsive is very key for the type of organization we are, and that's what differentiates us from academics as well.
On that note, I'm really sorry. I know there were a lot of really good questions that I was not able to get to. So please do reach out to us. And we will try our best to answer, because I could see a lot of scholars in the audience also sort of thinking about how to make impact. So just a huge thank you to all of you for joining tonight. I love these fireside chats. I always learn a lot from my colleagues. I hope you did too. I also learned from you all and the questions you're asking. So thank you so much. We will be sending the recording to everyone who registered. So we'll send it to you as well as other folks who had registered and weren't able to join. I want to thank Erum and Asad, not only for joining us tonight and sharing their wisdom, but just for their real incredible work every single day. I know that you both are making such an enormous difference in the world, and we're really appreciative. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for following our work, and thank you for supporting and partnering with us. Have a good night.